But I'd like to give some feedback now, on the off chance that a dev happens to stumble onto this thing. I want to give some of my feedback based on what I've seen here so far, and I think this is the one good thing about early access, is that like there's plenty of time for them to really look at what's going on here, because they're only at version 0.5 right now, and I assume they're going to want to get to 1.0, and there's going to be a lot of iterations in the middle, I imagine. So the first thing, and this is kind of the most glaring thing that I've seen so far. Your game's name is Stellar Tactics, which implies tactics. Now, you've definitely got the top-down, turn-based interface going. You definitely have the paint job. You definitely look like a tactics game. You definitely operate much like a tactics game. But there's no actual tactics in play as it stands right now. And a lot of that is due to just the AI, and not only the AI, but also the environments. The environments are very, very empty with not a lot of cover. And I would expect in a tactical game that there would be cover. I would expect the enemy to take cover. I would expect my guys to take cover. It feels like that should be part of a tactics game, is that you're tactically approaching all these scenarios. And unfortunately, most of the time, the game just kind of throws you into a really tiny room. You open a door and you're suddenly in combat, and there's really nothing to do. It's a rare sight indeed when you see that little spinning shield icon to say you have like half cover, and whether that half cover actually helps or not is really an open question in my mind. The other thing is too, going into this, I was expecting like, okay, I'm gonna have different builds. I'm gonna have characters that have ranged weapons, and I'm gonna have characters that have melee weapons, and I'm gonna have characters that have a mixture of both, right? The problem is, as it stands right now, if I made all of my characters, save for one, melee builds, I would have probably romped through this game even faster than I did, right? Because 9 times out of 10, you've got enemy AI that's just running straight at you. They're just melee, and they're just running full speed at you. They're using all their AP to come up to you, and they're just wailing on you. So I've ended up in a situation where, like, my main character, I was like, okay, I'll give him a pistol for short range, and I'll give him a medium range thing, or a long range thing, whatever it is. I think it's long range, right? That way I cover both of those sort of distances. And my idea was, all right, so he's got pistols, he's got rifles. I'll try to level both of them up equally. Like, we'll get a few shots off on the rifle, maybe, and then I can move him in close and get a few shots on the pistol. As it stands, the AI does two things. One, it runs straight at you. Two, it tends to fixate on my highlighted character. And so it just sends like all these guys rushing at you. So my main character is really, really good at pistols, but when it comes to trying to train them up to do rifle stuff, I never get an opportunity. Well, the last boarding action notwithstanding, it's very rare that I'm getting an opportunity to actually use rifle, right? I mean, as it was, the AI was kind enough to kind of stay back far enough that I was able to use the rifle mostly in that last boarding action, but that's certainly not the norm of the game that I've seen up to this point. And that's really not great, right? Because now you're kind of forcing people to, you're giving all this choice, but really when it comes down to brass tacks, you can't train your people into the things that you want them to train at. You're not being able to use them for the skills you want to use them for. You're just kind of, you might as well just make everyone have a melee weapon and a gun and just, you've just beat the game, right? And that also comes into the tactics play, right? Like, it was never really necessary to move my characters around, right? Just stand in the doorway. Eventually all the enemies will either run at me or they'll just stand there and let me shoot them. That's it. There's no happy medium in the middle there. So again, you're going against the whole idea of tactics. There's no tactics being used. It's just stand there in a doorway and unload on them. Grenades, I've relied on grenades quite a lot because they just plain work. I mean, you toss a grenade out there, boom, you get 6 guys in a circle, do massive damage to them. I mean, why not? That's just, that's the way the AI is behaving right now. So that stuff needs a lot of work. I think all of the environments need more creativity put into them. You need some cover. I get that you're going to have a lot of environments, and in general, I like the idea of the procedural generation, for that one, at least for that one area. But you don't necessarily have to rely on that. It's not like an on-off switch where you can only do procedural generation or you can only do handcrafted things. I've seen plenty of games now do a whole bunch of handcrafted areas and then kind of jumble them up and make it procedural generated that way. Like maybe there's a few procedurally generated rooms in the middle, but then there's the major rooms where the major battles are happening are maybe handcrafted and they're randomized. You know what I mean? You could do that and then make the experience really feel good as far as tactical, like put some boxes in the way, put some environmental things in the way, make it so that there's more strategy involved than what is right now. Right now, the silliest part of the game was when I was down in those the mines in this system here, and we get to the final boss of it, and it's literally a guy with apparently unlimited weapons. Like he had more than one weapon on him, and we were just sitting there, like just standing there, shooting each other with pistols, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's not tactics. That's not tactics. You can't put tactics in your name and expect people to not try to be okay with that kind of engagement. It was just silly. It was just, it was very, very silly, incredibly silly. So you really need to bring some of the tactics back into it. Now, the space stuff. The space stuff is the space stuff is cool. The space stuff is also the worst part of the game. It's possible to have a cool thing and to have it be the worst part of the game. It feels like there are two bolted on features that are competing with one another, right? You've got your base tactical top-down game, and then you've got this other thing that's kind of bolted onto it. It's like a Frankenstein's monster. You've got like flesh hanging off of various parts that doesn't quite mash up with everything else that's going on. Things don't, the controls are all different. The interface is all different. It took me far longer than I want to admit to find out that you can actually move up and down in space, but you have to click with the mouse. You can't do it with the keyboard. WASD works for moving in a plane, but trying to move up and down, and even then, when you do it with the mouse, it doesn't quite work the way you would expect it to. I understand, being a programmer myself, I understand that there are times when it's like you're so sick and tired of doing one thing that you need a little break and you want to do something else. And hey, I got shower inspirations as much as anybody else. It's like, hey, I'm going to go in. I got this idea. I'm going to go in. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to break out of this rut that I'm in. I'm going to go in. I'm going to make this feature, and it's going to be awesome. And I will be the first to admit, it is a quite nice feature. It's one that you don't see on any other tactical games. There's a good reason why you don't see it on any other tactical games, but I'll get into that in a moment. But it is incredibly awesome, and I'm sure it was just one of those things where it's like you just needed a break from the mundane, and just you wanted to do something cool and make it cool. And it definitely fits the rule of cool. It does not fit the game though. It's clunky. It requires you to dip into the help menu again, right? Like, you've already gotten the basics down from moving around on the map as it was, and now the game throws a complete curveball at you, and you got a completely different mechanic that you got to figure out. And it makes for, there's a reason why games have gotten away from manuals, right? Older games relied heavily on manuals, and I'm not saying that was necessarily a bad thing, but I am saying that we are in a much better situation now, where I think people have learned that you don't really need to rely on a manual if you're consistent and everything makes sense, right? There are things about this game that are not consistent, and that's bound to happen when you have a game that's you've been developing for a very long time. It's bound to happen. It's just, you have to have the wherewithal to step back, look at your entire design and go, do I want to scrap the design I had for this new found world, or am I off the beaten path and I need to come back onto it again? And I feel like the base design of this game is solid. And the space combat stuff is way off in the weeds. And I think the best thing they could do is scrap that entirely, the space combat stuff. Bring it back to the basic, It's okay to have it where it's just a top-down thing. It's okay, actually, let me put it this way. It's okay to take an old school approach to it. Go like old school Baldur's Gate, go Arcanum, any one of those other games. They had a world map that was very basic. It was a nice colorful map and everything, but basically you would click on a place and you'd say, okay, go there, and you would just see a dot going to where you go. And then what would happen was you could have encounters along the way. And then when those encounters happened, you would pop into a map, right? And that's fine. That would be actually probably the best change you could make to this, is to get rid of all that, because right now, as it stands, it's a lot of waiting around. You're going in space and you're like, all right, I need to go to this next planet, or I need to go to this next station. There you go into the target list, you select the station, you say go to, then once you get out of the the gravity well of the planet, then you hit the warp, and then you just kind of sit there and you just stare and you stare and you wait and you stare, and then occasionally something pops up, it's like, oh, there's a distress signal, you want to help me? And you're like, nah, screw you. It's you could do the basics of that without it being a snooze fest. You can have a top-down view of a ship. You can just make a top-down view like you have your characters now, right? Make a top-down view of a bunch of ships. Take the ships you have now in game, just show them from the top, show them from isometric view, right? You got the art already there, just use it. You don't need a three-dimensional plane, just have the 2D plane like you have now, and have them fly around that way and fight that way, and make that tactical. Right now it's real time with pause, which again, you're off the reservation. You're a turn-based tactical game. You're not a real-time, real time with pause game. You're tactical turn-based. Stay tactical turn-based. Make that tactical turn-based. Make the movements be just like you're moving your characters. the squares you move to, fire your guns, all that stuff, right? You'll have to completely rebalance how much damage everything does, because the amount of time it takes now to knock down the shields and all that stuff is going to be unacceptable if in a turn-based thing. But that's easy. That's just number crunching at that point. You know what I mean? You've already know how long combat should probably take based on the ground combat, right? Just make it similar to that. You can still do all your boarding mechanics. You still do all that stuff. It's in the same interface as everything else. You know, it's consistent. It doesn't require a help menu because you already know how things are working, right? If you want to do the mining stuff, cool. Just on the map, on the overworld map, have like an asteroid belt. You can go to the asteroid belt. And as you're there, maybe it pops up a button that says mine. And as you're mining, maybe it says, you know, maybe it then pops up a window that says, how long do you want to mine for? How many hours do you want to mine for? And then every hour that ticks by, that's a dice roll happening to see whether or not you have an encounter, you know, an enemy encounter or something. Like, all that stuff just fits into that mold. You don't have to break the mold for that. It's not as cool, per se, as what you've got, but it's also not as frustrating and not as boring and not as head scratch, right? It all fits. It looks like it's all part of one design, one vision, you know? It all fits together. And you still have unlimited, you know, horizons to explore whatever you're going to explore. You can still do the starship boarding like you've got it, everything else. It all still fits in. You're not breaking your baseline design to make that happen. What else? I think there needs to be a little bit more visual feedback. I get that we've got the combat log, and I'm guilty of really not reading the combat log, mostly because a lot of the enemies seem to get way more action points than they probably should have. Like, there were many points along the way where I was questioning whether the AI was operating under the same restrictions that I was operating under, because they were getting a lot of shots in when it seemed like they really shouldn't have been. So the consequence of that was a lot of that combat log was just scrolling by, and I just, you know, after 2 lines of combat log, I'm tired of reading it. You know what I mean? So it's nice to be able to, and often that's down in the corner and away from everything. It's nicer to have like some kind of visual cues off of your characters as to what's going on. The other thing I'd say is your colors are all messed up. So I always have to remind myself that the green bar is shields, because shields are never a green bar in any space game and any sci-fi game anywhere. It's always blue. And yet in this one, blue is your energy points. I don't even know what the blue bar does. I'm sure it's under the help menu somewhere, but I still don't freaking understand what the blue bar is all about. Sometimes I have 10 AP, sometimes I don't. I've never quite figured out what any of that is. I think there's a lot of complication there that probably doesn't need to be there. I also am not a fan of the fact that you can take damage to your health regardless of whether you've got shields up or not, because that kind of goes counter to pretty much every other tactical game out there, right? Where you have armor and that armor takes damage first. Occasionally, yes, there are weapons that will pierce through armor and hit you. But it shouldn't be the norm. It should be the exception, the rule. And so I think all that kind of needs an overhaul, in my opinion. Especially with like the elemental damage and stuff. Like, you kind of have to. I mean, it says it there that you're doing elemental damage, but you don't. when you examine an enemy, you don't quite know if they're weak to elemental damage or not. There's a lot of question marks there sometimes, and I don't know. The UI, I think, needs a bit of work there. And honestly, I don't think you need 3 bars of information. I don't know what the EP bar is for. I feel like having 3 bars on the screen is more visual information than most people would want to deal with, in my opinion. What else? The way you play with characters in this, how can I put this gently? Stop killing off characters. I get that you don't want the players to be too comfortable with their characters, but you start out the game with a whole squad, and you're starting to get used to them, you're starting to get used to their synergies, and you're starting to get used to how things operate. Then you kill them all off. Now, I do appreciate that all of their equipment went into the stack, and it wasn't just lost. I was angry about that at first, and then I realized everything went into the stash. We're cool with that. But then you get back on your feet, and then you've got 2 more characters into your party. You start to get used to them, start to get used to their synergies, and then they leave your party, and they're not. And then you gotta get all brand new ones, and then you gotta build them up again. Just stop it. You know what I mean? It's like at some point that is super frustrating because you never feel like you can actually get a hold of what's going on. I get that there's story reasons that you've done that, but they're flimsy story reasons. Stop doing that. Just give us a squad and stick with it. You know what I mean? You want these characters to matter. You want players to care if their character is knocked out in a fight. You don't want them to be super generic like they are right now. Right? I mean, that's it sets a bad precedent for the game. If it makes it feel like the game is it pulls you out of the game. It doesn't allow you to suspend your disbelief quite so easily, because it's like, oh, okay, these are just tools, to be used. They're not characters that I need to care about. And it looks like you want people to care about them because they have these random like woohoos that they give you, during a battle and stuff. And you very much could care about them because you care about leveling them, and you've spent a lot of time trying to tweak their abilities and stuff. But it's yanking them away constantly just becomes almost meme-like in this game. It's just stop doing it. Rework your story so that that's not necessary, and it's not necessary. It's a stupid little thing that I don't know why you bothered with it. I suspect it's something to do with you wanted players to start out with nothing and feel like they're building up a team. And you know what? There are other ways of doing that. Like, we have this big old ship, right? I could have a secondary team that I build up, I don't, that I maybe swap in and out or send off on away missions and stuff. There are ways of doing that doesn't require you to hit the reset button all the time. So that was very, very frustrating in the first couple of hours. Now I feel I'm better because I'm able to keep this team. I'm able to like figure out who's doing what and who's going when and all that stuff, and getting our synergies down and things. That about covers a good portion of it. I know I've been rambling on for about 35 minutes, but there's a lot of good in this game. This is, I don't ramble on this much about games that I don't like. And I like this game. I like what it's trying to do. It's just very super frustrating in many ways that I think it doesn't need to be frustrating in. Oh, perception. Perception. Let's have a little chat about perception. As I was mentioning a little bit earlier, anything with entertainment value, one of the most important things you can do to entertain people is to suspend their disbelief. This game, I mean, I've pumped so many points into perception into my characters, and yet they can still walk into a room and have something basically walk right up next to them and magically appear. And it's like, that is really not great. That is really not great. There are ways of implementing perception in the game that don't require anything to do with visuals, because it's like, it's incongruous to what's here. Like, we're in these constantly small corridors, and you're telling me that this guy was able to basically walk up and breathe down and basically walk up and tap me on the shoulder, and I couldn't see him, like, and I'm looking down the hallway, like, come on now. That's a little bit ridiculous. I think that needs to be completely excised from the game. You can leave perception in, but it shouldn't affect the visibility of enemies. I think the enemies should be just visible. Just make them visible. They don't have to be hidden. They can be hidden until an encounter happens, but from then on, make them visible. It should just be visible. In fact, I wouldn't even hide them from encounters. I would make them visible all the time. As soon as you get on a ship, that way you're not constantly walking around like, well, where is this? Where are the enemies at here? Where are the enemies out there? You can, again, playing back into the tactics part of it, you can look around the whole ship and say, oh, there are 6 enemies in this thing, or 5 enemies in this thing. So if I want to be tactical about this, maybe I should take out these guys over here who are in this armory. Like, there's only like 2 of them there. Maybe there's some good stuff there, and I can take them out first, and then I can go over and do. Again, that's more tactical than just saying, well, hello, there's like 3 guys just showed up right behind you. They were there the whole time, but you just couldn't see them. Come on, really? The perception as it is right now, I think it affects, if I look at the character sheet here, it affects range weapons, which is good. Increases your maximum range, chance to hit your enemy, and provides a bonus to your chance to score a critical hit. All of that is good. Perception may also allow you to see things that are hidden. I don't know what that means, but anyway, that all of that stuff is good in practice. The fact that it's hiding enemies is not good. It shouldn't come into that. I think there are plenty of examples out there, and here's where I'm going to say something that probably some people will disagree with, but it's okay to borrow mechanics from other games. You know, look at Wasteland 3, look at any modern games right there. They have perception in them. You know, the Outer Worlds had perception in it too. And they integrated that into the dialogue option. So perception was, not only did it help with your critical hits and critical strikes and all that stuff, but you had dialogue options that were also like, that were tied to perception. You could say, oh, if you have perception of 5 or whatever, you have this option available to you now because you're able to perceive some other way of settling this, you know, this conversation. And I know that you're using charisma for that right now, but that you could still use charisma for that. Charisma could still be another option that unlocks, right? Charisma can also affect, you know, vendor prices and stuff like that, which it might even do already, right? So, I mean, that's fine. Yeah, strike better bargains and develop relations and factions and all that stuff. Sure, that's great. That can all stay. It can also be part of, you know, dialogue options and stuff. Be creative with it. You don't have to. This hiding of enemies, again, it may make some vague sense in your mind, like, oh, you shouldn't be able to see all the people that are on this starship because you know they're behind these locked doors and everything. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because again, people who are playing this game are playing it to be tactical, right? They like tactical turn-based games. You're not getting someone who doesn't like a tactical turn-based game to play your game. You're in a niche genre. You're going to get people who play other tactical turn-based games. And the more information you can give them right up front, the more highly regarded they're going to see your game, because they're going to be like, oh, okay, I can now be more tactical about how I move around. Yes, granted, you can have a fog of war that extends at some point, but it doesn't have to be 2 feet in front of somebody's face either. It's okay to show everyone in the next room. It's okay. You can even make an in-game explanation, say like, we tapped into their sensor grid so we can see their internal sensors, so we can see where everybody's at. It could even be a thing where it's like, it only shows you a vague idea, like maybe it shows you 2 blobs, but doesn't show you them actually moving around. So that there's maybe 2 people there, maybe even 3, because they might be standing together, but you don't know exactly how many. But it can still give you enough information to really plan out how you're going to do things. Right now, it's just so, it feels random, and I don't think that's what you really want to go for at the end of the day. And it also feels silly when you're literally standing in a hallway and something walks up right next to you that you didn't see. It's like, oh, come on now. You know what I mean? Like, literally stands next to you, like those dogs that were running at me in the boarding action I just did. Like, how would you not know that they were there? Right? You got to suspend your players' disbelief a little bit more than that. So those things. That's the other kind of base feedback I have there. The crafting and stuff looks overly complicated. Again, that's one of those things where sometimes you need to take a step back and not over-engineer something. It may tick off the box. It's like, oh, this is a really deep simulation. You know that the simulation is deep because I got 900 things you need to craft this, a basic weapon. It's like, yeah. I mean, you're kind of stretching it there. Like, just, it's okay to be very straightforward on something. Not everything requires a freaking spreadsheet just to figure it out. You know what I mean? You can make that crafting a lot nicer than it is. You could make it a tree even if you wanted to, and just craft through that. It doesn't have to be that mishmash of nonsense that it is right now, that you can barely even understand what you're looking at, right? Again, the less people need a help menu, the better off it is, right? I get that you've gone through all this effort and work to put a big old help menu in there. And what I'm telling you is, basically, if you do this right, you don't even need that, right? Because again, I reiterate, you're not getting someone who doesn't like tactical turn-based games, combat games, to play your game. You're a niche game. You're only going to get people who like that, right? That's the kind of people who are going to play your game. So there are certain conventions that if you follow them, you don't need a help menu, right? Someone who has played tactical turn-based games is probably used to certain things, certain conventions. They're used to how cover works. They're used to how the selections of things work. They're used to how to target body parts and stuff. They're used to certain levels of feedback that you don't quite get here. They're used to being able to accurately point their characters in a direction and not have it spin completely counterintuitively to the way you think it should spin. They're used to doing all that stuff, and they're used to, certain quality of life conventions, and it's okay to borrow them. It's okay to bring those in. You're not suddenly a clone because you borrowed a few concepts. You still stand on your own 2 feet. It's just the way it is. You just gotta kind of, if you do that, if you stick to that, and you stop forging this other weird path, you don't need a help menu. And furthermore, you've got a quest log, right? Like, look at this. You've got a log here. You got completed, you got active, right? And it's quite well organized. Like, it's good. You know, it's got all the information you need. It tells you where you got to go, everything. It's great, right? So why aren't you putting tutorials in here, right? Like, they could just be optional. You know, you could have another section even that's just like tutorial, optional tutorial stuff, right? And someone could click on that and go, oh, this, you know, this tutorial will show you how to, you know, mine for asteroids, and this tutorial will show you how to do a boarding action, right? And then you could set it up like it's a quest that's, you know, set up the parameters so that people can figure out how to do it without needing a help menu. And once you've walked somebody through it once they've done a tutorial mission, they no longer have a need for a help menu, right? They've done it. They've got muscle memory to operate on. And there's a good example of this in Horizon Zero Dawn, where whenever you buy a weapon, the game pops a tutorial optional tutorial mission into your log. It puts it in a separate section, right? And that tells you like, oh, go use this weapon against 3 enemies, right? And it even gives you like the types of enemies to use it. And it's completely optional. You can do it or not do it. If you do it, you get a little XP. Not a whole lot, just a little, you know, pittance of an XP or reward for it. Nothing big, you know. If you don't do it, you don't do it. You just skip it. You know, if you already know how the game works, you don't need to run the tutorials. You just leave them be, and you're not missing out on anything, right? Something as simple as that, it eliminates the need for all this other nonsense you've got, right? You make it by giving the players the option to run it themselves, like actually physically press the buttons. You're reinforcing it better that way than you would by having them read something. You know, it's just the natural progression of things. That's why a lot of games tutorialize you. Now, you can make it optional. It doesn't have to be something that everyone does. Like, if I come into the game a second time, I don't need to do that if I already understand. And furthermore, if I've played a bunch of tactical turn-based games, some of those tutorials probably completely unnecessary. Like, I probably already know I need to reload my guns. I probably already know I have action points and how they work. I probably already know that cover, you know, how cover work, you know, and I don't need those things. I would just need it for things that you have in the game that aren't in other games, like mining or boarding actions or stuff like that, you know. So these are all the things that have been in my brain. There's obviously been some bugs that I've run across. Those I expected there to be bugs. Nothing's ever bug free, so I have no complaints about that. I do think though some of the scripting you're gonna have to look at, because there was that one time early on in the spider cave where I tried to set up my characters tactically again, back to tactics again, where I had them individually walk around and tried to set them up, and then it didn't trigger the actual boss encounter. So that comes back into, you've given me the option to move my characters individually, which means you obviously want me to be able to set them up before a battle starts, before I trigger a battle, but then the battle doesn't trigger, so there's a disconnect there. You're gonna have to look at that. You're gonna have to decide if that's what you want or don't want. You know, if you don't want me to be able to set up for a battle, you can remove the option to even be able to move your party individually, your individual party members, you know. Just saved you a whole bunch of bug fixes. Yeah, and then you also need to figure out your vendors here, because you've got way too many vendors and their inventories are not useful for the kinds of things that you need. Like, trying to how much time did I spend looking for freaking grenades? You know, it's just make sure your vendors have the basic supplies. You know what I mean? I can understand they might not have exotic supplies, but they should at least have basic things like grenade and stuff. I shouldn't have to go searching high and low for it. You know what I mean? And you don't need 22 vendors either. Just like have 3 vendors. Have a ship vendor, have a weapons vendor, and have a crafting parts vendor. You know what I mean? Done. Yeah. Right now you've got like 22 vendors, and I don't know why you've got so many vendors you have to walk to. It makes no sense to me unless there's some kind of internal coding limitation that you have. I mean, you've got filters in place, right? You've got a ton of filters in place, so I can filter their lists by whatever I want. So why you have 92 vendors? You know what I mean? It's just what is the point there? Yeah, I think that covers most of the bases. So I want to emphasize though, I do like the game as much as it frustrates me. It frustrates me because I really like the game and I want the game to be good. I'm frustrated because the game's not good in certain ways, right? So it's, you know, understand that coming in. And yes, I know, you got to read the help menu more. You got to read the help. Here's the thing. I hate help menu. I hate them. I absolutely hate them. We're beyond the time when manuals are necessary. I lived in that time period and it sucked. I'm now in a time period where we don't need manuals. And it's much, the world is much brighter for it. So just like, you know, let's all agree, let's at least agree to disagree that I need to read a help menu. How about that? How about them apples? Anyway, that's where I stand with this. So that's where we will stop right now with Star Tactics. I will be back again, I imagine sometime next year, because it's they got a lot of work ahead of them, and I don't think I would be very surprised if they have a release here in 2020. It's probably going to be 2021 at some point. But I'm going to at least wait until until they're much closer to some sort of release. Maybe, you know, like a version 0.9 or something like that. And hopefully by then they'll have a lot of good changes and everything else in there. And they're still making lots of progress. So it's not like it's certainly not a abandoned or dead project in any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely being worked on. It's definitely getting patches, lots of good patches, lots of big patches. It really desperately needs the dev to kind of take a step back and consistency is what it really needs. It needs to just be consistent with itself. It needs to be internally consistent, externally consistent, upternally, downternally consistent everywhere. That's what it needs. And that's what it doesn't have right now. And, you know, rule of cool is not always the best way of operating. It is the way I'm gonna spin that. But anyway, that is it for me, friends. Let's put a save in here. One nice thing too, I will point out, is their save games have all been backwards compatible so far. So with all the major changes they've made, you're still able to just load up a save game you had and hop right in and see your stuff. So that's always a good sign. That's always a good thing. So yeah, that will be it then, my friends, for now, for Stellar Tactics. And I hope everyone has enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it after a fashion. I look forward to coming back to it once it's had more time to cook. So, but I accomplished my goal of at least learning the game, because it's been in my library for a while, and I did a first impression video on it, and I've been kind of prodded and poked to take another look at it. I didn't really understand it this is one of those games where you don't really understand it until you've played it a bunch. And even when you've played it a bunch, you still don't quite understand it. There's still a lot of just muddy areas with the game. And yeah, but hopefully all that will get worked on and get fleshed out, and we'll get a better product for all of it. So, but there you are, my friends. That is it for me for Stellar Tactics. For those who will be watching the VOD, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you